Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Expert Insight presentation on the April 2024 Department of Justice ruling under Title II of the American Disabilities Act, and what this means for us as we think about accessibility and how we can get started. On the next slide, I'm going to go ahead and give a quick intro of myself. Hello again, my name is Stacy Fonts. I'm a program director here with the UW Continuum College. At the Continuum College, we work to expand the reach of the University of Washington on a global scale. We do this by breaking down barriers to make education possible for all types of learners. On our next slide, I'm going to give a brief note about our professional and continuing education division. Within that unit, which is part of the Continuum College, we work to give professionals the educational experiences that they need to thrive. In my work, I get to connect with amazing professionals across industry, all playing a role in the impact we make in transforming the lives of our learners wherever they are in life and wherever they want to go. This will be especially true once I get to the introduction of our presenter today. But first up on our next slide, we have a brief overview of what this Expert Insight series is. These will be a series of free webinars where we will feature one of our expert instructors so they can share what's trending in their fields, answer questions about tools, give tips, all things that can help you be successful. At the end of these sessions, we will have a brief amount of time to do Q&A. Please be sure to use the Q&A feature to submit your question, and we will do our best to answer them. And now on to a quick little disclaimer on the next slide. Because we're talking about the recent DOJ ruling, I wanted to make note here that our presenter's presentation is not designed to answer every question or to be an interpretation of the law, nor is it legal advice. But this is an important conversation to have tonight because it's a starting point for us in our work, regardless of where we are, to understand how we can be inclusive and make an impact in our digital world. And so without further ado, I'm going to now introduce our speaker. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Cheryl Burgstahler. Cheryl is an outstanding human and global leader in IT accessibility and advocacy. She spent almost 4 decades at the University of Washington, where she either built or had presence in what our great institution uses today to ensure we meet the needs of learners regardless of ability. She is the founder and recently retired director of UW Accessible Technology Services and UW Do It, the university's Disabilities Opportunities Internetworking and Technology Center. That center's mission is to advance the success of people with disabilities in education, research, and careers around the world. She is an advocate for universal design of learning, which ensures facilities, so physical spaces, as well as websites, media, documents, and other information technology and services are accessible to, usable by, and inclusive of individuals with disabilities. She is a published author, co-author, and has delivered countless presentations all over the globe as a speaker and consultant. She has numerous awards that recognize her leadership in this space, including the Diversity in Teaching Leadership Award from the National Alliance for Partnerships and Equity, the Online Learning Consortium's Accelerate Award, and even the U.S. President's Award for Mentoring, which is an award that is administered by the National Science Foundation on behalf of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. In her very active retirement, she continues to educate others as an affiliate professor with us here at the University of Washington, as well as City University of New York. Cheryl and I are currently developing a specialization in web and digital accessibility that will launch in early January 2025. We see this course as a way for technical and non-technical professionals to deepen their knowledge by building a foundation in web and digital accessibility, being able to differentiate someone's self within the workforce, because they'll be able to say they are skilled in creating digitally accessible content, as well as increasing career opportunities by closing the accessibility skill gap. Information on this course will be included at a slide at the end of the presentation. I believe I've worked with Cheryl for not quite a decade, but we're getting close. And I
Yes.
wish to acknowledge here her excellence and express my gratitude really for her humility and leadership. I always look forward to learning from you, Cheryl, and I'm super excited to be able to be here tonight and share this learning opportunity with our guests. So thank you, Cheryl. The virtual floor is all yours.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, we've been having great fun putting this course together. We'll tell you more about it at the end. But what we're going to talk about tonight is some of the challenges individuals with disabilities face when they're trying to use computers and digital documents and other technologies. And then, as Stacy mentioned, well, I'm going to focus on the April 2024 Department of Justice ruling on digital accessibility and what this means for state and local governments. That includes our agencies funded by the state and local governments. And so the University of Washington and other public institutions are covered by this. Many people are talking about it as a new law. It is not a new law. We already have this law, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 and the 2008 amendments. The law has not changed, but now we have regulations for how to comply with that law through this ruling. It's like the physical environment, architecture. The ADA applies to architecture. We must make it accessible to people with disabilities, but they develop regulations to tell you how wide doors should be and so forth. And so now we have those types of rules for IT. And so I'm going to give 10 tips. It's not nearly enough for giving a whole picture, but if you're just getting started at an institution, could be a company, could be a state agency, or it could be an institution of higher education like ours. I'll share some of our tips, things we've learned that we've adopted when we had to comply with the state law, similar law, about 8 years ago. So the new law is called, the rule is called the Department of Justice Rule on the Accessibility of Web and Mobile Content. And I'd like to start with frameworks, like how to think about some of these things. And in the programs that I've directed over the many, many years, we have two major frameworks. One is when we're working directly with people with disabilities, we're always looking at the framework of self-determination. What skills, what resources, what technology, what do they need to reach the goals that they've set for themselves in their lives? And so that's what we're working on. When we're talking to faculty, staff, institutions, technology companies, we talk about the framework of universal design of physical spaces, of technology, learning activities, services, you name it. But in the case of what we're talking about today, of course, we're talking about the application to IT accessibility. So let's just take a little 1 minute view of history, the evolution of how we have responded to human differences. There have been times, and even today, unfortunately, around the world, where people with disabilities were eliminated or excluded or at least segregated unnecessarily. And then in the middle of the last century, there was a big push, particularly in our country, to cure, to rehabilitate, and to accommodate. So we looked at medicine and how can we cure disabilities? And if not cure them, how can we rehabilitate a person so that they can be more functional? And then if that isn't giving them total access to something, then how can we accommodate them? All these things are reactive measures. The first two are focused on the individual with a disability and fixing them in some way. Not that there's anything wrong with being cured of something you'd like to be cured of, and then accommodate them to fit into an environment that wasn't meant for them. So this day and age, we're in the era of social justice for a lot of different underrepresented groups, including people with disabilities. So if we really think that people with disabilities have a right to be in our courses, to participate in our services, to access our technology, then we need a framework that can help us make that happen. And universal design, as you'll see, is a good framework for making that happen. So what is an accommodation-focused approach to digital materials? Well, that's when we adjust a product or an environment for a specific person. For example, in online learning, often we remediate inaccessible PDF files and other documents to make them accessible to a person with a disability. We also make sure that the videos are captioned, like an introductory video in a class, to make sure that it's captioned and accurately captioned. so that someone who's deaf can access that content. So that's an accommodation if you provide it after the fact. And so they sign up for the class, the PDF's not accessible, disability services, some other office has to make it accessible to them. There's a video, it's not accessible to them, so that office scrambles to make it accessible to them. So reactive design. In universal design, we take a proactive approach. We anticipate that people with disabilities will be in our classes and use our services and access our technology. Why? Because they're welcome to participate in all those activities. So why wouldn't they be represented in those groups? So there shouldn't be a big surprise when a student with a disability enters the class and needs access to the materials in the class. But with the universal design, we plan ahead. So it's the design of products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. So the question then becomes, how much can we build into the environment to make it accessible, and then reduce the number of accommodations an individual student might need, or another employee, or someone using our services. The characteristics of a product that's designed to be universally designed is it's accessible, which I have a little bit narrower view than maybe you're used to using, but accessible. I'm using it as accessible to people with disabilities, that they can actually do that. A blind person can actually access the content on a web page and so forth. But it's also usable, that they can get through the navigation on our website, find what they want in a reasonable way, not some very awkward way when people without disabilities are finding it easy to access things. So we need to think about that. And then inclusive. As much as possible, we like the product, like it might be a website, for everyone to be using that website and make it accessible, rather than create an accessible version. Say, well, people with disabilities can go over to this version, and then others can use that main version. So that's what we shoot for. So when we look at universal design practices in general, they embrace what's called a social model of disability. Comes out of disability studies, and it means we look first to the environment. And maybe we shouldn't be looking at the person being lacking in some way, but we should be thinking that the environment is, that the people who created the environment did not do so thinking about the wide variety of abilities that people in our society have. And so that's the social model. And we look at disability as a diversity issue as well. It's just one of many diversity issues. First generation students, people from underrepresented minority status, and so forth. It's just one more disability diversity group. Also civil rights, that they have a civil right to use the products that we develop if we're making them available for the public. And intersectionality. That means that people rarely come, maybe never come with one identity to a program or a service. And it's true of people with disabilities as well. Often people have multiple disabilities, and they have one type of learning disability, but then another type of disability as well, for example. But then they have other minority identities as well, and other identities, and based on where they live or their experience or background, their family, whatever. So should we think people are very complicated, and we should just assume that with everything that we create. So the rule was on April 24th, 2024. Department of Justice came out with this rule. And so it's under the ADA, which is all about non-discrimination on the basis of disability. That's what it's all about. And they focus then on web content, mobile apps, provided by state and local governments. And so all digital materials, actually, and digital products, which is just about everything in this day and age. So when we look at the rule, it's under Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, which includes the 2008 amendments as well. It clarifies the obligations of state and local governments. We've said they have to make their programs and resources accessible to people with disabilities. They've made it clear over the years that technology is included under that umbrella, but the government hadn't given us really specific guidelines. It ensures that no person with a disability is denied access to government services, programs, and activities. It mandates technical standards to ensure that the accessibility of programs and services provided through the web and on mobile applications and otherwise using technology, that those are all accessible to people with disabilities. And advances ADA's promise of a more inclusive society. So all we're doing here is trying to make a more inclusive society, which I think we can all agree to is a good idea. Sometimes it takes a little work to do that, but the basic idea makes sense, I think. So what's Title II of the ADA? Well, that's part of this very long document, the American with Disabilities Act. And in the Title II, it talks about state and local governments. And so Title II talks about their services, their programs, and their activities, and says that they need to make them accessible to people with disabilities, including those offered on the web and through mobile apps. So you see here the services they offer. It could be a course, the service we offer, the programs they offer, the activities they offer. They need to be accessible, including those provided with technology. So what is a rule actually? I talked about a little bit, but it's actually a regulation and includes a set of requirements issued by a federal agency for the laws that have already passed. They've already passed Congress. So we have a law, and then it's decided, well, we really need to get some guidelines, some standards, so that people can comply with that law. It only makes sense. And so way back when ADA was first conceived of and approved of, we've talked about guidelines for IT accessibility, just like the architecture. So this has been a long time coming. So what process was used? Who was involved? The Department of Justice published a notice of proposed rulemaking about a year before the actual law or the actual final rule came out. And so we contributed, we as individuals at the university and some large organizations like AHEAD and AFN, if you've heard of that organization, and EDUCAUSE and so forth. Sometimes people got together and created a joint document. At the University of Washington, most of us just did it individually. It's a very, very long document, but you could make suggestions for improvements and even just state that you agree with something. So that we gave those that input. And then by April that next year, it's when the Department of Justice then approved. They actually didn't make a lot of changes from the draft. I was kind of surprised. They didn't even take all my suggestions. Can't imagine that. So what are examples of state and local government and public entities? They call them state and local entities, and sometimes they call them public entities. But when you think about government offices that provide benefits or social services, like say food assistance, health insurance, employment services, police departments, the courts, election offices, and then school districts at all different levels, community colleges, universities, hospitals and healthcare clinics, parks and recreation programs, libraries, and transit agencies. So a lot of services that are supported by the state and local government. So a technical standard. Well, that is the list of things you have to do to meet the regulations. And so the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines have been around for a long, long time. They were developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, a group that makes rules for operations on the web so that we can more easily create websites and things that are compatible with each other. And so the last version was 2.1. The version today, the most current one is 2.2. But it's my understanding that they decided that 2.2 is so new that it was more reasonable to stick with 2.1 at this point, because so many institutions like our own have already been targeting 2.1 for all the efforts that we've made. And so there are 3 levels of 2.1 and the other WCAG guidelines, and they're level A, AA, and AAA. And so AAA is the highest standard, and then AA, and then A. And so many institutions like our own have already adopted 2.1 level AA. And so that's what the Department of Justice did as well. There are some exceptions, but they're very narrowly defined. And so don't try to figure out how to get out of this by making exceptions. But some archived web content, particularly if you aren't linking to it, or that means the public can't link to it, pre-existing electronic documents that are not being updated. A lot of those things you can just take down from the web. An individual's password protected documents, things you might be using in a work group or your course, maybe course notes to yourself, but they don't make an exception out of course materials. So all of the course materials, if you're teaching a class, must be made accessible. And old social media posts, you don't have to go back and redo those. So there are not a lot of exceptions. But even in those cases, you still need to provide accommodations for an individual requester. And so they might say, well, I wanted to access some of those old social media posts and I can't access them. I can't access them because I'm using a screen reader and I'm blind. You would need to make those accessible to a person that had a right to those resources. So WCAG 2.1, developed by the Web Accessibility Initiative of that W3C organization I mentioned. It actually includes a set of 4 principles that web content, for example, should be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. It has guidelines built from those principles, and then it has practices they call success criteria that apply to websites, web applications, mobile applications, videos, digital documents, other technologies. So it can be applied to about any type of technology, just not the web. I thought they should have called it digital rather than web because it does apply to things that aren't actually on the web. They don't listen to me about that either. I've got to do something about that. So who are we talking about? Who will benefit from this WCAG 2.1? What if we actually did make everything accessible? A lot of us have made efforts already, and who does that benefit? Does the WCAG 2.1 want to provide access to? Well, I recommend that faculty members developing courses or other people developing websites that kind of think about 4 people rather than get just down in the weeds all the time. Sometimes you have to be there with the rules. Think about some people that would benefit. And so here are some people that have participated in programs that I used to direct. And so if you just think of these 4 people, you can go a long way toward understanding IT accessibility. So Zane is blind, and so she would be one that would benefit. I mean, she's deaf, excuse me. She would be one who would benefit from having captions on videos. And it's very important that those captions be accurate. When you think about it, it's kind of a mean trick if you put your video up on YouTube and use those computer generated captions, and then you don't go back and edit them because they're really only a draft. Then Zane's going to see those, one sentence gets mushed in with another without punctuation to give her cues. She's going to see misspelled words if she's taking a technical course. That's not a good way to start, by hearing words and not being able to hear the words, but seeing them spelled the wrong way. And so that's really important for Zane. Hopefully you apply universal design and you caption those correctly, you edit those captions before you offer the class. And so if Zane shows up in the class, she does not have to ask for an accommodation because you have thought of her in designing your class. Then there's Anthony. He has multiple physical disabilities and does not have a usable voice. So he has all kinds of technology he can use, large screen, touch screen. He has just enough motor skill so he can use a touch screen as long as the keys are large enough. And he can do a lot of things on his computer. He can create shortcuts for maybe his full address and so forth, so that he doesn't have to keep typing that in one character at a time. Some technology all of us use. He also uses technology to interface with the telephone. He actually provides phone support. That's actually his job, is technical support for people who are getting assistive technology because they have a disability, and many times talking to parents about when their child is newly diagnosed. So it's great for them to hear from him because he has used this technology and he's very successful. So you might think, well, all this technology is very complicated. His phone, access to the phone, he has to, and then his phone, he could type in things and the phone will speak for him and so forth. But the thing to know if you're a developer, like a website developer, is that the main thing you need to do for Anthony is make sure that you make everything that you do accessible with the keyboard alone. Anthony cannot operate a mouse reliably, but he can access all the keys on the keyboard. And so where someone might use a mouse, he might use arrow keys. And so just making sure, if you had a pull down menu or something where typically a person might use a mouse, just make sure that that function can be obtained by using the keyboard alone. So you can learn about all these technologies. There are all sorts of gadgets out there that are really fun to see and use. But you don't have to in order to make your website and other technology accessible. Jessie has multiple learning disabilities. She has difficulty getting her thoughts down on paper when she's writing, but even if she's typing on a keyboard. And so she dictates to her computer. And then she also has difficulty reading. And so the computer will read back to her the content on that she's writing, an email message or something. And so it reads back to her as well. So that combination of technology, the only barrier that she runs into taking a class or performing her duties on a job is when a document is presented to her or a website where there's content her screen or text to speech software cannot use. And so if she accesses a web, maybe a PDF document, let's say, and it's just been scanned in, it's just a picture, it looks like it has text on it, but it's just an image of text. Her screen reader can't read that aloud. And she would have a very difficult time reading a long article without having the text to speech software to read the content to her. And so she's somebody, if she was in a class, would have to have that document remediated so that our text to speech software could work with it. And so there it's pretty easy. Whatever you put up, make sure that there's access to the text. And that can be by making an accessible document, making sure that you follow the accessibility rules to make a PDF that has access to the text. Then she'll be able to use that material. So then there's Hadi. Hadi actually works for the Access Technology Services here at the University of Washington. And he does a lot of testing on products for accessibility. And he's blind, uses a screen reader. That's a little bit different than what Jesse's using. It has a lot more features. And so the screen reader will read aloud to him, but it'll also tell him key information about the format. And so it will tell him that there's a list and it has 7 items in it. It will tell him that the content is a heading, not just regular text. It says, oh, this is heading 1. Oh, this is heading 2. Oh, another heading 2. Oh, now it's got a heading 3, so it's a subheading. And so it tells him that. And so he can get an idea of what that document, how it's organized. He can even skim through those headings. He might only want to read the ending of it, maybe the summary at the end of this research paper. And so he can skim through there and get to that information. Again, Jessie doesn't need all of those features because she can actually see the formatting. So these 4 people, if you think about them and you've made your website or video accessible to them, it's probably going to be accessible to a lot of other people as well. So what are some of the specific WCAG 2.1 practices? You might look at success criteria. Well, surprise, surprise, caption your videos, include alternative text for images. Now that would be for Hadi, because if you have content within an image, he wouldn't know what's in there if it's in an image. But his screen reader could read the alternative text that you've provided, and it will tell him what's in there. And maybe it's even just decorative. Some of the images on my screen today are just kind of decorative. And so I could just say it's decorative, or I could describe it. And in PowerPoint, there's an easy way to do that, to add that alternative text. And so if Hadi then had my PowerPoint slides, he could find out what's in all those images as well as everything else that he can read. And then for Hadi again, formatting, structuring those headings, as I mentioned, and the lists. And there are also ways you can structure tables so that he isn't just reading line by line. He's having each cell in that table identified for him. Using descriptive wording for hyperlinks. This is also useful to someone with a screen reader, where their screen reader can tab through all of the hyperlinks on a page, a web page or a content page in a course, and read what that content is. And so if you put as your link content, your link text, if you put click here for all of them, it looks kind of nice actually, it's really consistent. Well, what Hadi's going to hear from his screen reader is click here, click here, click here, click here. If you wanted to just skim through and see what that web page linked to, that's not very useful to him. So he'll have to go back and read the surrounding text. And then he'll know what that link goes to. Very cumbersome, very awkward, not usable. That's one of those usability things. And so it's really easy to just put simple text for your link text. And it doesn't have to be long. It can be like do it website, rather than say, now go to the do it website at click here now, or at here and underline it or whatever. And so that's really important. Descriptive wording for hyperlinks doesn't take a long time. It's not hard to do. If you don't do it initially, you're going to go back and have to spend a little time, but that's not even hard. And then providing keyboard access. I mentioned that with Anthony. And adequate contrast for people who have visual impairments. My slides are demonstrating that today. I have a lot of contrast. And also for people that may have difficulty paying attention to the slides, it will help them not be distracted from the background. So no backgrounds and that have any designs in them, and have a lot of contrast. So who enforces this new rule? Well, the Department of Justice or the Office of Civil Rights, and there, it could be enforced with lawsuits. So there are hundreds of, of examples of what might happen if you should have the Department of Justice or Civil Rights Office come and complain about your websites. And usually these complaints have come from students who are blind and they or other students with disabilities and maybe professional organizations. And they bring their complaint to the Office of Civil Rights and they or the Department of Justice and say that I can't complete this course, I can't exercise this program, I can't buy these products from this company that has them set for sale for the public. Um, and then the Department of Justice will take a look and they will get back to that organization and say, this is what you have to do. So you would reach an agreement with them. There are tons of these agreements out there, and they almost you can read 10 of them, and they'll almost be word for word. It's pretty simple. Some students weren't able to access your online course because they were blind using screen readers, and so you need to do this, 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 and this by this date. And so that's probably, I don't know, but I assume that process will continue, and we'll see. And so typically, who are the covered entities and when do they need to comply? Well, if the size of your organization is 50,000 people or under 50,000 people, then 2027, April 26th. And if you have 50,000 people or more, like at the University of Washington here, then you have to comply a year earlier, 2026. So you don't have a long time to do this. So I'm just going to give some tips now to get started. If you're working for any organization, some things to think about. And I think number one, I'm going to say is that you promote a digital accessibility program within some kind of a context. Have an overall picture. What are we doing here? Rather than just thinking, oh, well, we have to comply with all of these success criteria in WCAG 2.1 AA. Why are we doing this? What is the overview? Well, you can promote digital accessibility within the context of social justice. This is something we've always had to do. This is not a new thing, but we should do it now. and and think of it in the context of an inclusive workplace, your DEI efforts, or a campus, and adopt a universal design framework, that proactive approach. You might use different wording for it, but the idea that you adopt that proactive approach rather than accommodations only. So you can create a document. I'll give you a reference to a book that has this, worked out for you, and in different contexts and so forth. But figure out what your scope is. IT accessibility is pretty, that's going to be your scope. What the definition is you're going to use. I presented one. There are others out there you could choose. What are the principles that you're going to be looking at? Not just the rule, the WCAG, but what principles are you going to be guided by? And those guidelines, practices, and then the process. That's going to be important. How are you going to have a process in place to be most efficient in reaching the requirements of the rule? There are actually three principles of universal design, sets of principles that I like to point to if you want to cover all aspects of IT. The one that goes along with the definition that I gave a few minutes ago is just the 7 principles of universal design, just basic principles of making things inclusive, not erecting barriers, even dealing with right and left-handed users and space for people to maneuver with a wheelchair and so forth. Because remember, IT doesn't usually just float around on the cloud. We're usually in a physical environment using it. So it's worth kind of thinking about that aspect as well, making sure that environment's accessible. And then there are 3 principles that you've probably heard of in the universal design for learning. And these really focus on teaching practices, but they are a subset of the universal design principles. They just provide further detail for any instruction you're going to give, whether it's in instruction provided by a professional organization, a company, or an academic course at any level. So we follow those 3 principles. And then there are 4 principles I already mentioned, and those are the ones that underpin the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And so those 2 subsets, they intersect with each other, and they are subsets of universal design. In a nutshell, you could say that whatever you're doing, provide people with multiple ways to learn things, to gain content, to demonstrate what they have learned, particularly if they're taking a class, but in an employment setting as well, that they can convince you that they've learned what they need to learn, and to engage with other people, with academic content, and so forth. but then also to make sure that all the technologies, the facilities, the services, resources, and strategies that you're using are accessible to individuals with a wide variety of disabilities. And so that's kind of in a nutshell what all of those universal design principles will tell you to do. So when I think of universal design, I think of it as an attitude that we're trying to make things as inclusive as we can, and we're thinking of people even though we can't do a perfect job. It's a goal, we'll probably never completely reach it, and it's a process. Completely, you want to go over and over it again to think, how else can we make this thing more inclusive? Even when you give an accommodation for someone in your company or in your class, pause for a minute and say, could I have done that in my ahead of time, and so they wouldn't have to ask for an accommodation? Just ponder that. Sometimes the answer is no, but a lot of times the answer is absolutely yes. It promotes best practices. It's not lowering standards in any way. It's proactive, can be implemented incrementally, and it benefits everyone, or at least tries to, and minimizes the need for accommodation. So that's a good thing all around. So people don't have to be treated like as someone not expected in this particular class or this program, but rather just like everybody else. And it supports diversity, equity, and inclusion. So tip number 2, hire staff. We have a team, our IT accessibility team, that does training and consulting and other support as far as accessible IT. You might have one already. Well, I don't work there anymore, but I know that staff is actually increasing in size. At the UW, in our IT accessibility team, they have a web accessibility specialist, a document accessibility specialist, an IT accessibility specialist for testing products and working with vendors, accessibility developer, an access technology lab manager. We do Braille production. They have student employees that do some of this work, and instruction, accessibility specialists to work with faculty. And they're in the process of hiring someone, a lead digital accessibility consultant. You might want to apply for that job. So that just gives you an idea. We have in the past, we thought we need some generalists, but we also need people to really zero in on specific areas so we have a real depth of knowledge in multiple areas. Ensure that the technology team engages with campus units and professional organizations. Sometimes they can be pushed to do that. It can be too much behind the scenes, just kind of working on things that aren't really getting out enough. And so at the UW, the IT accessibility team engages with a lot of people on campus. The ADA compliance coordinator and deputy ADA coordinator for digital accessibility, the disability resources for students, and there's a similar office for employees. Continuum College, of course, and Teaching and Learning Center, the library, procurement, and the IT support staff from campus units. So think about all the people that you can engage with and ways to do that. They also engage outside the university. The IT accessibility team here at the University of Washington is well known at the Association for Higher Education and Disability, AHED, the Access Technology Higher Education Network, which is ATHN, EDUCAUSE, the IT Accessibility Community Group, Teach Access, and other organizations. And so that's really important too. If you're a smaller school or organization, you maybe can't be out and about a lot. But because of the pandemic, we have a lot of things that are continue to be available online. And so they don't take a lot of money for travel. And you can be part of a group and learn from others and share with others what you know. Tip number 4, create a structure for long-term engagement of campus leaders at multiple levels. So what's structured? I mentioned we have a law here in Washington State that was about 7 or 8 years ago. And we decided we were going to create a structure. And the first one is this ADA and Accessibility Steering Committee. That's a high-level committee. And that's dealing with all ADA issues. So not just IT, but physical environment and employment and just everything. And high-level administrators are in that group, and they work with subgroups. They come up with recommendations. We help them with the IT, accessibility recommendations and so forth. And then they help make those changes that will make us more successful at the University of Washington. Then we also have an IT accessibility task force that we set up about the time that we had to comply with the state law. And there we have more middle managers that are in a point in their career where they can have influence above them and below them. And so we come up with a lot of activities that we do there to kind of make sure that that we can kind of push the agenda forward on accessible IT. And then we have the IT accessibility team that I already mentioned that group. Those are paid staff that actually focus in that area. That's critical. And then the IT accessibility liaisons group. We needed something besides these other three groups, we decided. And what we needed is people that aren't experts about accessibility, but they're interested in learning more, and they might be able to have some impact, certainly on their own job, but the other people around them. And so we have this group where they meet 3 times a year for half a day for some training, and they do some basic training before they even get started. And they just have to have the right attitude about IT accessibility, want to learn more, and then contribute to this team. I've talked to some people at campuses and say, well, we can't get the university to require that you have people like that, representatives. Well, we couldn't either at our institution. So we have a voluntary group. Anybody can join the IT accessibility team. We have about 160 people in that group now. And they're all very positive. So you don't have a negative aspect of anybody forcing them to be on this team. Okay, number 5, we want to create a comprehensive website with legal issues, policies, guidelines, exemplary practices, resources. And so we have that at uw.edu/accesstech. And the IT accessibility team is the one that maintains that website. And we've created it in such a way that it can be useful to other organizations as well. So it doesn't have UW all over everything. And then offering trainings. We actually record the trainings and we put them up on the website. They, not me anymore. We integrate training within offerings of the Teaching and Learning Center and other groups. And we'll hold accessible design meetups through the IT accessibility team. And they offer consulting and they sponsor events throughout the year. So that. And then think about some tools you might use. There are a lot out there. Terrell Thompson, the manager of the IT accessibility team, is a good person to talk about that, as he's worked with others on campus and come up with some good tools to use. I'm lucky. I attended the same conference, Accessing Higher Ground, a few weeks ago, and the IT accessibility team gave a workshop actually on some of the things that they're doing. And so I think this information is right off the press because it's from their presentation. But some of the tools that they have right now is an enterprise web accessibility checker, and they're using DebBot, and a domain discovery tool, Little Forest, odd name, I think. Anyway, PDF remediation tool, Equidocs, Census Access, which is a document reformatting tool, so a person can take like an inaccessible PDF and convert it to not a real pretty, but maybe an accessible Word document. Students can use that if they're kind of desperate on a Saturday night and the disability service office is not open. And then Blackboard Ally we use in our Canvas courses. It does some document conversion as well, similar to Census Access, but also has an accessibility checker. And so anyway, take a look at that. And those tools then can make you more efficient, or the enterprise type tools can help you keep track of how well you're doing on your campus or in your employment situation. Offer incentives. That's the kind of the fun part. During the time I was directing the group, we came up with an idea of developing capacity building awards for units on campus that were doing an exceptional job of implementing accessibility practices. And these come through the task force, the IT accessibility task force, and we give them out once a year. And that's a positive thing. We'll give them a certificate, frame it. Sometimes we'll give them a couple so they can hang them up on different walls in their organization. We were able to get some centrally funded captioning dollars for high impact videos. It's only $20,000 a year, which is not a lot of money, but it's plenty. And what that group can do now is they can freely caption some of those videos on highly used websites or big lecture classes, or maybe smaller, but they're using them over and over again, the videos. And we could pay for the captioning, or they have students in the IT accessibility team do that captioning for them. That gets them started, and then hopefully they'll continue to caption as they learn that it's not that difficult to do. And then competitions for capturing all the videos in a unit that are presented on YouTube, giving awards to units that were able to do that, to edit those computer-generated captions. And there are all sorts of different ideas that have come up from other institutions as well. Tip number 8 is to encourage computing and IT departments to teach employees and students about accessibility. This is for those of you who are from post-secondary institutions today. Get them involved in the Teach Access initiative. This initiative was started by Microsoft, Google, Amazon, other IT companies, because they're trying to address the IT accessibility skill gap. They can't find enough people to hire that know about IT accessibility, because still to this day, most computer science and information technology graduates at post-secondary institutions in this country have not taught about accessible practices. And so they're really pushing that agenda, getting out to faculty and say, please, please, please teach this, and giving them some materials to use and so forth. So that's a real worthy effort to support if you're working for a company, but also to get faculty on your post-secondary institution to engage with. Number 9, adopt some sort of a model for systemic change that embraces a universal design framework. And we developed a model. It's a little flow chart type thing. We have an image on the screen. But I'm just going to give you an example of how we apply it to IT. And you can look at the model, the physical one, a little bit more, maybe if you take a look at the slides. But the model has different levels. One is a vision. What is your vision? Why are you doing this? Well, maybe your vision is you want to be compliant. That's a worthy vision, but maybe even more. Like I have here, the University of Washington vision regarding to IT might be to procure, develop, and use technology that is accessible to people with disabilities. And then your values. There you can look on your own company's website or your institutional website. And often values, like at the University of Washington, they have on their diversity and equity and inclusion. And compliance is always something that we do. And so that's another value that supports what we're doing on IT accessibility. And then a framework. I presented the Universal Design Framework, where you've got your scope and definition principles and so forth that you can create the details for in your plan. And then look at your current practices regarding IT accessibility. What are the stakeholder roles? How are they funded? What are the policies and guidelines and practices and procedures and training and support that's already there? I think what you'll find is there'll be some current practices maybe that are very much accommodation focused, like Disability Services Office. They just wait for a student to call them up when they've got an inaccessibility, and then they fix it after the fact. Maybe some of those roles could be changed to be more proactive, more universal design focused. This can't happen overnight. But think about what your perfect world would be. What would be the new practices you'd like to employ? And then kind of take a look at your one set and then the new set, existing and future, and see how you might chip away at reducing the distance between them, moving more toward universal design. And then look at measure your outputs and your outcomes, even using some technology like I mentioned, and create measures and benchmarks in your data and analyze things, create reports so you can see how you're doing. And then look at your impacts. These are broader. Is there evidence that there's increased alignment with your vision and your values? That more things are being done proactively, the more faculty make their courses accessible and so forth. And then kind of circle through this stuff again. Look at where your practices are now and where you want them to be in the next step and so forth. So, but come up with some kind of model. And then number 10, to undertake reactive and proactive, top down, bottom up, middle out efforts that ensure long-term impact. I run into people at campuses all the time that say, well, we can't do anything because we don't have top level support. I'm sorry, but you can do some things. You can start an IT accessibility team of people that want to help you do this. So there's some things that you can do. Of course, you want to work toward top-down support, and you want to work bottom up and middle out, and you want to ensure long-term input. Look at impact. Look at compliance with the Department of Justice rule, not just as a lot of work to do, it's a lot of work to do. Okay, that's a given. Okay, so it's a lot of work to do, but we're hired to do work, so let's do that work. But as an opportunity to take steps that will lead to a more inclusive institution, community, society. It's for a good cause. And we shouldn't have to do so much work. Why? Because we should have been doing this all along. And so now we have to go back and fix things and enjoy the journey. Most of my career has been around this area. And it's been wonderful to see the improvements. It's frustrating at times, but to get together with people that are like-minded and working in the right direction, it's really fun as well. So I've listed a few resources on the slide here. And again, you can get copies of this slide. Department of Justice rule. That's over in the ada.gov website. It's kind of hard to find, but you can do some searching around and it'll pop up. One thing they have is a shorter copy, which is the Department of Justice rule fact sheet. I recommend that you start there with the fact sheet and read through that rather than start with the rule. Um, and and then of course you can read the full rule, which is pretty dense, but you can search around and see what applies to you. Then there's the UW Accessible Technology website that I mentioned, and that's at uw.edu/accesstech. And then if you're interested in this application of universal design, I'd point you to the Center for Universal Design and Education at uw.edu/doit/CUDE. And take a look. We've got a lot of checklists for how to make your computer lab accessible to people with disabilities, a checklist of things to do. And I've got an image of a book that I wrote, Creating Inclusive Learning Opportunities in Higher Education, a Universal Design Toolkit. So you have to pay for that. All these other ones are free, so you might want to start there. And so that kind of sums up what I'm talking about today. I'm so glad that you joined me, and I really enjoy what we've done here so far. We have some time left. And Tracy, did you want to look maybe for a question or two or talk more about your program?
Yeah, so thank you again, Cheryl, as always, and to our guests who joined us today. Please feel free to use the what is it, the Q&A box to submit any questions you have. We have time for a few. And if I can get us to advance to the next slide real quick while we're waiting for questions to come in. I just wanted to highlight that this is the course that Cheryl and I are working on, and to really encourage folks to keep the momentum going. If you're looking to build a strong foundation on a broad range of issues about making digital technology more accessible, consider joining us. The first offering of this course will start January 13th, 2025. Applications are being accepted through end of the year, so through December 30th. Again, want to note that yes, we'll do the questions, but want to note that the course itself is designed for non-technical professionals, but can also serve those with more technical backgrounds. The experience level is really open to all. You don't need to have a specialized background to be successful in this course. And then I also wanted to do a quick plug that next Thursday at noon, so 12/12 at 12 p.m. Pacific, we will be having an info session for this course. So we'd love to serve you as you continue learning and hope you might consider joining us then. And then I want to pivot real quick to one of the questions that just came in. And it's if Cheryl, you could give a few tips on PDF accessibility.
Yeah.
And I'd like to plug again on the resource slide. I'm visiting the UW Access Tech website where they have a bunch of
Yeah.
great resources for anyone. You do not have to be affiliated with the University of Washington to access a whole slew on tips, which include PDF remediation.
Yes, and that's a good important part of the answer that I'm going to give is that go to that accessible technology website at the University of Washington, and we have a lot of tips. There's actually a video, one of those training videos I mentioned, that's on that topic as well. I guess the first question is, do you know how to make a PDF? Because if you don't know how to make a PDF, then you can read those instructions and it'll talk about how you can put tags in here and there so you can get that formatting so that it can be read by Hadi's screen reader. Put that in. My first question to faculty and administrators, though, is why are you using a PDF? And sometimes they come back with a very good reason, like some things that forms and so forth. But sometimes it just is, it's kind of a convenient format to use. The problem with PDFs is they're difficult to make accessible, but not impossible. Again, if you're developing PDFs. But if you want to update your PDF, let's say it's a syllabus, like say for the next year, maybe made it fully accessible, it's going to be really hard to just simply edit that and keep the accessibility and be able to use it. And then using a Macintosh and a PC is different. So be really intentional about it. There are some things PDFs are good for. I'll tell you how we use them. They use them. and the Do It Center and the IT accessibility team on their websites. Um, we'll have a document in HTML. That's the easiest, that's the language of the web. HTML, that's the easiest way to make it accessible. But people like myself want more than that because I don't want to print out the HTML and use it as a handout at a conference because it's just not very pretty. And so I want a PDF up there. And because the Accessible Technologies Services is committed to accessibility, we do put a PDF and we make sure that it's accessible so it can be used. And so who would use that PDF? I would, because that's the one that I want to print out if I'm going to take it to a conference. But we always make sure that both copies are updated at the same time. So because that's one problem too. Sometimes they don't update the PDFs. And so there is some use for a PDF. We've had, like, we worked with the Board of Regents, and they had a bunch of their meeting minutes for a billion years. They were over 100 years old, of course, our institution. I don't know how far back they went on the web. They're all in inaccessible PDFs. And the first question we'll ask is, how, and not all of them are inaccessible, how many do you think really need to be up here? You need to maintain them all. I get that. But how many need to be in your public site? And so you can come up with a compromise where you'll keep, well, maybe for 5 years back. And then we'll have a statement that says, if you like earlier copies of meeting minutes, contact so-and-so. That means those archived ones, you may not be able to be required to make accessible at that moment. As I said before, you are required to provide an accommodation. So if somebody asks for the older ones and they want them to be in an accessible format, you do it at that point, but the probability is really small. And so then you make your accessible PDFs, the current ones. So we'll help units do that. So first start, sometimes people have a lot of really old PDFs that are inaccessible and they really don't need to be out there. And so that would be a good thing. But again, if you first learn how to make a PDF and then read this accessibility stuff. And here's where AI comes in too. If you Google these days and use their AI tool, which is automatic now, you can talk about making an accessible PDF tell them what operating system you're using and what other software you're using. Because the directions will be different, whether you're using Macintosh or PC and what version you're using. And so then the AI is doing it, in my experience, is doing a pretty good job of coming back with something that's really tailored.
That's great advice. Thank you, Cheryl, so much. And then we'll hang out for another moment here to see if another question comes through. We are almost at time. I wanted to get to the next slide real quick. Just to make a quick plug, my colleague will be offering one of these learning opportunities next week on unlocking success in product marketing. So that is next Wednesday, same time, same place. And again, the slide deck will be shared, so there'll be all these resources available. But I do want to pivot to our final question. And thank you again for sticking around for at least another minute or two. This is specific to the course. Will the course be designed to help people transition into working in a new job within this field? Or is it more focused on helping those use this information within their current jobs? I know my
Both.
answer is both. Yes, my
Yeah,
answer is
very
both.
clearly both.
Yeah.
We're going to even talk about some job opportunities. As I mentioned, there are job opportunities out there. Companies are looking for people that know something about accessibility, and at different levels too. You might be in an IT shop and you may not be the one that's going to do all the hardcore accessibility testing, like say Hadi does in the IT accessibility team. But you can learn enough about accessibility in this class that you can do some of it, and then you know what needs to be done, and you know what techniques that you need, and you know where you need specialization, like the PDF. It was very clear to me that we needed a PDF accessibility expert a few years ago, and we were able to get approval for hiring someone that could really focus on that area because it's important. People do want to use PDFs, and we want to make them accessible. So yes, you will learn of opportunities.
Yeah, it was a great question. And I feel like in closing, I'm pulling a quote real quick. I have to find it. It comes from the Teach Access white paper. Again, another great resource that's embedded within this slide deck that I recommend folks to check out, regardless of coming from private or public sector. I know it says Teach Access, but they aim to serve all. It's a quote from Matt May, Adobe's head of inclusive design. And you'll have to excuse me because I'm looking at a different screen to read the quote. And what his statement is what we have right now are a few people that know a lot about accessibility. What we need are a lot of people who know a little. So
Yes,
what he's saying there, right, is we don't necessarily need everyone to be an expert, but we need to have people with working knowledge. And that is what we are aiming to
absolutely
do with
fair.
this course, to serve you in your current role and also help you advance into other roles. So I think with that, that's a great place for me to stop our recording for the evening.